And welcome once again to another episode of the HoriZone Roundtable, which is presented by 4lights.fm. You can catch us there, and you can subscribe via iTunes, Stitcher, tune in, whatever app you can think of. We're probably there. I'm Bob McDonald. I am the senior I'm the only Cleveland State columnist over at More Than a Fan Cleveland. You can see my column every week at cleveland.morethanafan.net. And with me, as usual, is Jimmy Lemke from Panther U.
Hello, everybody.
And you can find Jimmy on Twitter at PantherU and at PantherU.com. And yes. Jimmy, this week we have ourselves a special guest.
I'm very excited about this.
Yes, absolutely. We have ourselves James Squire. James, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Well, I live in St. Louis. Grew up in Valpo. Did not go to the university, but did graduate from the high school. And I've been living in St. Louis for the past 35 years or so. Started seriously following Valpo University the 2001-2002 season, and been following them ever since, and been a fan of whatever conference that they're in too. So.
Oh, I'm glad to have you, man.
It's good.
We should mention the blog.
I'm sorry?
We should mention On the Horizon.
Yes.
Absolutely.
It's a good catch-all if anybody if you like following all the teams.
Right.
If you're in the morning, you wake up and you want to know what the story is at all 10 schools. Jim has set up On the Horizon to give us give everybody the chance to put all of it together.
Right.
All of the news pieces together. How do you put that thing together, anyways?
Well, I have a big, long list of bookmarks, and any chance I get, I make use of an RSS feed to keep track of what I've already linked to. In some cases, I just have to know where to go. But I have a big, long list of bookmarks that I just run through.
And where can people find you on the Horizon, by the way? What's the address there?
It's horizonleague.blogspot.com.
All right, go visit. Lots of good stuff over there.
Yeah.
So
it's good because I go to it just about every day because it's when he's updating it, it's good for me to see. I don't remember every website. And I don't keep up with all the stuff. So for me to be able to get all that look, I can look and make sure that I'm catching all the articles from the different schools. I'm a fan of having that. So thank you for doing that, because
sure.
Otherwise I wouldn't be as informed as I am.
Yes. And James, where can people find you on Twitter or any social media for that matter?
Well, I'm mostly on Twitter at STLVUFan. Is the handle.
All right.
I have a Facebook account, but I don't go there very often.
That's okay. I ejected out of Facebook in 2011, and haven't looked back since.
Right.
So
it's how I connect with some of my friends aren't on Twitter, so it's how I connect with them. But I mostly hang out on Twitter.
There you go. As do most of us. So there's a lot to get to today. We definitely want to talk about Wright State's disastrous Michigan trip. We definitely want to talk about Valpo, definitely solidifying their spot at the top, and this is why I'm glad we have James here. But first, UIC is no longer winless in Division I.
Yep, they won.
They won.
I don't want you to think that I'm, reveling in your misery.
Yes,
I
because
am reveling in your misery. I think it's kind of funny, but it's okay.
Because of
They had
course.
to win at some point.
Because, of course, the team that they beat in overtime on Saturday, ladies and gentlemen, Cleveland State.
Yeah. It's I don't know. I don't think that UIC is as bad as, say, New Jersey Institute of Technology was a few years ago when they pulled me over. I did watch that team a bunch to see just what they were doing that was so bad. I also remember, if you remember, Prairie View A&M was another team that pulled an offer.
So did Bryant a couple of years ago, I think. Bryant was also futile.
We've had a few of them, and I really don't think UIC is that bad because there's a few players on their team that they don't have, that other teams don't have. The one that I'm really pointing to is Dikembe Dixon, and he's going to be a great player for the conference for a long time.
He really is. I mean, he is.
I agree.
Dikembe Dixon is obviously a freshman of the year candidate. He has been all year. But the thing is, I mean, it was and they did it in overtime, and they did it with both of their big men. Both of their big men fouled out, and it was just the convergence of everything that could possibly go wrong for Cleveland State. Andre Yates was out again. He has a high ankle sprain and a foot problem, plantar fasciitis, so he was out. Gary Waters is, his rotation has basically devolved into, I don't know, you figure it out, because he's just running everybody out of there. With the exception of Jono Jansen, who is sitting at the end of the bench and is just glued there permanently. I think he's sitting over there at the end of the bench wondering, why the hell did I leave Australia? Because Gary Waters is running everybody out there, including 2 walk-ons. And he's running everybody out there, and he can't find the right combination to save his life.
Number one, Cleveland State's not going to be winning anything this year, so it's fine to be able to get walk-ons out there. Walk-ons aren't there just to play on the scout team; they're there to develop too. Because if a walk-on turns into something while you've been around, while you're playing, if a walk-on turns into something, you've gotten a player without having to spend a scholarship, and that's that's pretty important to be able to have that. So
and I think that's kind of
not develop those guys.
There have been examples of walk-ons that have earned scholarships too. There was one at Valpo some time ago.
Yeah.
Jason Avercamp earned a scholarship here. Let's see. Let's see. We've had probably a player every so often, probably every 3 or 4 years. There'll be a player that'll earn a scholarship.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that those players don't. That doesn't mean that if they don't earn a scholarship, they're not useful. I mean, we have had quite a few players that have turned out to be really, really, really important for us.
And Cleveland State has had that they had that in Breon Watson, who was a walk-on the whole time he was there. They've had players who've earned scholarship. There's Jared Calhoun from many years ago during the Rolly Massimino era. Tim Kamchik was actually started out as a walk-on, but he didn't end up earning a scholarship. Yes. Also, Miles Hamilton was a walk-on. He spent his transfer year. He's going to be a walk-on, but they gave him a scholarship, and of course, he handily repaid Cleveland State by getting kicked off the team this year. So, but yeah, the 2 that they have right now that are currently there, there's obviously Tim Hasbargen, the kid from Germany, and then they got another kid, not Daniel Levin. Unfortunately, his knee is hurt. Not a tear, thankfully, but he's probably not going to come back this year. He's a walk-on as well. And then you have Nelson Maxwell. Maxwell is actually an interesting story because he's from Orange, but he played at, I think, Fishburne Academy, and he's a walk-on as well. He was brought to my attention from one of my followers on Twitter, a local hip-hop artist by the name of Joey H. So at Joey H4, he's actually got a song out. Yes, I'm shamelessly plugging the kid because he's the one who put me on to Nelson Maxwell. But yeah, he's he's pretty much been the kind of focal point. He's pretty much kind of been the stand-in, fill-in role for, point guard, because Cleveland State doesn't have one. The problem that those two had yesterday is neither of them scored, and that's the ongoing problem that Cleveland State has had, and it came to bite them in the ass yesterday. What makes matters worse is that the guy who was scoring, Kenny Carpenter, he had 2 shots to win the game, once at the end of the game and once in overtime, and his final shot in his last shot at the end of regulation, he tried to shoot it with 14 and a half seconds left, and it wasn't even close. It was like clank foo. It was, and then he did the exact same thing. He did the exact same thing in overtime. I mean, he finished with 24 points, but great, he finished with 24 points, but those are the 2 things I remember.
Right. Well, it's unfortunate. Sometimes you get the bear, and sometimes the bear gets you. Yeah, it's I don't know what to really say about Cleveland State at this point. It's not. I think some of the problems are just structural at this point. Well, and then we also know that this team would have been just fine if they didn't, for the stuff we won't mention anymore, the transfers out. So I don't think it's as much worrying about as making sure that you can keep the guys you have. Well, I think even beyond that, I think the big issue that they have had is that I think Gary Waters I think he kind of knew that Trey Lewis and Anton Grady were going to transfer. I think that kind of went without saying. I think what he didn't count on was Kaysa Keene going back home to Canada, because he was probably gonna be the starting point guard if he stayed here. So he ended up transferring to Carleton University in Canada, which is actually one of the best college teams in Canada. So, and it's closer to home. It's also in Canada. I think Valpo played them. Well, he's from Canada, so.
I think Valpo played them in August.
They did. Yes, they actually did. Yeah, and he was on the team at the time. It's like
that's right.
I
remember that now. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, he did.
What kind of talent level do they have in Canada? Is this is it mostly like Division II level talent? Like what is it?
I'd like to say yes. I mean, theoretically. I mean, I don't know. I mean,
it's interesting. This idea that there might be like a whole other country of teams that are definitely not as talented as the United States teams, but maybe there's teams that can beat it. Because didn't Valpo lose it 1 or 2 of those games this summer?
One of the games, whoever they were playing shot lights out, if I remember right, and beat us pretty handily.
Yeah, I think one of
I can't remember which one that was.
I think if I understand correctly, Valpo went up to Canada, played Carleton University, and I believe they also played Brookwood Elite, which is an AAU team.
Yes, it was Carleton University that they beat us 77-59.
And if I'm not mistaken, Kaysa Keene was their leading scorer.
That's funny.
Irony of ironies.
I could tell you in a second.
Yeah. But yeah, so you lose Kaysa Keene, and then Miles Hamilton, who was also a point guard, he flames out spectacularly. So I don't think Gary Waters anticipated the gigantic hole at point guard that he now has, and I don't think he also anticipated the inconsistency of the play of DeMonte Flanagan, because DeMonte Flanagan has been for the last 2 years. We knew that he was eventually going to take the role that Anton Grady was in. But with the problem with DeMonte is that, he's 1 game off, 1 game off, 1 half on, 1 half off. Yesterday he pretty much sat on the bench for most of the second half with foul troubles, because he got his 4th foul at 5 minutes into the second half. And yeah. And the other problem is, I think Gary Waters also probably expected infinitely more from Vinny Zolo. He probably expected at least a little bit more than he's gotten from Aaron Scales. And since he hasn't been able to get that, he's had to start relying a lot more on a Rob Edwards, on a Jabri Blunt. And I actually feel bad for Jabri Blunt because he actually tweeted out because he actually missed a couple of free throws yesterday that probably would have iced the game. And he actually tweeted out he felt really bad for missing both of those free throws. And I almost wanted to say, man, it wasn't your fault. I mean, it wasn't completely your fault.
What was it? We almost lost last on Friday night against Green Bay in the rivalry game, and Akeem Springs, who has been very good from the free throw line all season, was so bad that after the game he actually stayed behind and shot free throws I think he shot free throws like for 2 or 3 hours in the arena after the game. Yeah. Kind of a little bit reminiscent of Alec Peters after we went down to Valpo, and I mean, you guys beat us by 12, but Alec Peters was not very happy with his own performance, so he ended up like getting right back into the gym because he only scored 7 points, and he was kind of really down on himself. Yeah, I like to see these guys. I like to see these guys showing that they care about losing these games, and not playing well. It's nice to see them get in and be interested to work on that almost immediately afterwards. So,
as a matter of fact, after the Ball State game, if I understand correctly, he sort of led a come to Jesus meeting on the bus ride home, because I think that was in the team's mind, that was our worst loss of the season, was at Ball State. And
if I were looking at it, I'd probably consider it as the worst loss of the season.
And he was quoted in the paper afterwards as really being strong about not being very happy with the team's performance.
Yeah. I mean, I think part of the reason Valpo lost that game was you guys had – Valpo was very hurt during the non-conference season. I mean, not to the level that Wright State was, but you guys had a bunch of injuries you were dealing with, and they all kind of converged right on that one Ball State game.
Right. Well, you had a couple of very key injuries.
I think Squire had just come back, but he only played like 3 minutes, right?
Right. He tried to go one time and apparently couldn't do very much, so he never came in again. And Tavon Walker was still out.
You're right. So do I really? I mean, these are one of those things that it's one of those times where you feel bad that these injuries happen, and you always hear that the selection committee takes things into account. Yeah. But do they really take them into account when? Do they really take this into account when for a mid-major like Valpo? Yeah. I don't know if Valpo would have the non-conference, strength of schedule to really do that. But either way, they've been doing very well this season, and I would hate to see that, that Ball State game be the reason that the selection committee decided to not go with Valpo, because it was more than Scara and Walker. I mean, Walker didn't play, Scara played barely at all, but there were other guys that were hurt and playing hurt. And the selection committee takes things into account, like they'll definitely take into account when Denzel Valentine was out for Michigan State, but will they really take it into account when a team like Valpo is missing players?
Who knows?
Yeah. And one of the things too, and I think, and as I've seen, even after the Valpo loss to Wright State, was the question of, does this loss affect it does affect their prospects? And it sounds like that this was the Wright State loss was their mulligan. At least that's what Joe Lunardi said. But knowing Joe Lunardi, he says a lot of things that basically mid majors don't like anyway. So
Right.
I'm not really a big fan of Joe Lunardi, but he's the St. Joe's SID. So what are you going to do? He's an A10 guy.
Yeah.
The whole feeling of the A10, the whole like slogan of the A10 should be, we're high majors and we're shutting the door behind us. They don't want anybody to think of their schools as mid majors.
Now wait a minute. Joe Lunardi is an SID?
Joe Lunardi is the SID at St. Joe's in Philadelphia.
I did not know that.
Oh.
Okay.
Unless he's moved on, but he was that for a long time.
Okay.
So, but I mean, the Wright State loss notwithstanding, Valpo turned that around and has destroyed everybody else since. They've immediately dispatched everybody. This last week, dispatched Cleveland State like they were nothing. Destroyed
you're also talking
State
about
again like they were nothing.
Bottom 4 teams in the conference. So
true.
Yes, they are. And I think with that, but then at the same time, then you had Wright State, who had a disastrous trip up in Michigan. They get blown out at Oakland, and then today they lost against Detroit, and Detroit just lost to Northern Kentucky, which was which basically to me. And we'll get a little bit into this later, and I'm sure that sparked the ire of Detroit fans that they lost to Northern Kentucky, and then of course Detroit turns around and beats Wright State today. So
I think Wright State ran into two problems. Is that in that both of those schools in Michigan are coming off really disappointing times. Oakland and Detroit. Northern Kentucky loss. The blowouts by Valpo, I think both of those teams had designs. I mean, everybody, especially those two schools, but everybody kind of sees Valpo as like this team to give your best shot to, and for them to see themselves lose by that, that much against them, and then the other losses that those two schools have taken, I think there was a lot of frustration that some of those players had going into that. Into those games. So I think Wright State just kind of was in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and then in Northern Kentucky again, just surprising everybody. And then Northern Kentucky goes. It's amazing because Northern Kentucky goes up to Michigan and does what they do. Meanwhile, Wright State can't do it. Cleveland State wasn't able to do it. Youngstown State couldn't do it. Naturally, Youngstown State and Cleveland State had probably less chance than anybody to do anything. Of course, then again, I'm sorry. Youngstown State beat Oakland in Oakland. So
I was going to say they did half of it.
They got half of it. But they didn't succeed all the way. So,
right.
You get a Youngstown State that gets halfway. Splits the pair where Wright State can't.
Right.
I'm wondering, is it possible that at the end of the season we're going to look back and see that Wright State was much better at home than they were on the road?
That could be it. I mean, the Nutter Center is, by all accounts, a really tough place to play. So it would stand to reason that they could definitely they have the opportunity to. They have the opportunity to go undefeated. To be able to, do very well at home. Their challenge, of course, is going to be their challenge is going to be on the road. Their challenge is going to be on the road. It was in Michigan. It will be at the Arc against Valpo for the return matchup because Valpo is going to look for blood.
Yes.
Now, I mean, they probably saw that. They probably saw that sweep in Michigan, and they smell blood in the water. So they're probably chomping at the bit to get a rematch with Wright State.
It's kind of why I'm not looking forward to our rematch with Valpo because Valpo won that game by double digits, but Peters didn't have a great scoring game, so I'm sure he's going to come out and drop 35 on us. Or try. I mean, and when anybody tries to score on us, they usually do. Did either of you get to see the Green Bay Milwaukee game on Friday night?
I saw part of it.
I saw everything but the end.
It was a very exciting game.
Yeah, that was a really that was really, you talk about rivalry games, Jimmy, and that Milwaukee Green Bay game that was exactly that was the perfect, back and forth, button heads, outstanding game. I mean, that could have went either way because that's how good that game was.
Green Bay, at one point in the second half, Green Bay was shooting 78.6% from the field in the second half. And we were down like 1 or 2 after only being up by a couple at halftime. It was just an incredibly odd game. Because for all the time I've been a fan of Milwaukee, there's something I've learned from the free throw line is that Milwaukee's very bad at the free throw line and Green Bay's very good. And the last 2 years have been like a complete bizarro act. Like Green Bay has all of a sudden become one of the worst free throw shooting teams in the conference. And we became the best.
Second worst, I think UIC has them beat by a country mile.
Yeah, I mean, one of the worst. Let's put it that way. So it's odd seeing Green Bay struggle so much for the free throw line, and then we come to this game Friday night, and both of us did. We shot, I think it was 69% from the line, which is still like about 6%, 7% less than our season average. So both teams didn't really come up with a way to. Both teams kind of left it open to losing the game. Like, we both had openings. Green Bay played porous defense. Ours was somehow even worse. It was just a really, really bad game all around. Todd Rosiak's the beat writer for the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel for UWM, and he said he put out a tweet on Friday night during the game. He said neither team's playing much defense. And I said, I replied to him. I said, I think much is a bit much. There was no defense whatsoever. It was an incredibly bad. If you were going to make a video as to how not to play defense, that exactly right there is what you'd show people a tape of this video of this game Friday night, and you'd say, good God, please don't ever play defense like this. And it was so awful. And I've been thinking about it, and a lot of the teams in the HoriZone League are just playing bad defense.
Yeah,
bad
this is
defense.
True.
So
what do we attribute to that, though? I mean, is it because the pace of the game is now faster because of the reduction in the shot clock, or is it they're still getting used to the way fouls are called? The hand checking is now kind of taboo, and they're getting called on it a lot more. I mean, what do you think that's kind of driving these ridiculous looking scores at this point?
Well, I do think that Green Bay and Detroit. I do think that we added Oakland for one, and Greg Campy is very much a proponent of kind of like a free running style. Detroit has, Ray McAllen's kind of built his team around that idea that they're going to run and they're going to take a lot of shots. And then Youngstown lost, as we mentioned in the previous podcast, Youngstown lost Bobby Haynes, so they've had to adjust their style of play. So now they're a free running team, and then Green Bay loses Wardle and brings in Link Darner, and he's and Link Darner is this really great, this free running coach. So,
and then meanwhile, of course, you still have Wright State, who does, Wright State, who is, that's their defense is kind of their thing. I mean, Cleveland State, except this year notwithstanding, that's their calling card. And Valpo this year. Valpo this year, their defense still remains pretty solid. I mean, in terms of, not really allowing too many people to score a lot of points on them, for the most part.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So, I mean, there are some outliers within the conference, but it's you're probably right as it relates to everybody else. Kind of transitioning to that fast-paced type of offense. The irony of it all is that on Friday during the Oakland blowout of Wright State, it seemed to me at least that Oakland kind of took what Wright State does defensively and kind of shoved it in their face basically.
I wouldn't have any problem agreeing with that.
I mean, and that's really, yeah. And I think getting back to Wright State and Oakland, when we talk about that, Oakland, does that does the Wright State game, does that indicate that they've kind of finally turned it around after kind of a so-so first half of the conference season? I mean, that's kind of the question that drives us, really.
I think it's more muddied. I don't think that I don't. It's not that I don't think that Wright State or Oakland is the number 2 team or close to the number 2 team. I think what it is that you have this. You just have a bunch of teams, and Oakland's one of them. Wright State's another, and it was just Oakland's time. I think Wright State is still one of the best couple teams in the conference. I think that things have kind of shaken at them a little bit. Like if I were to put together kind of a power rankings right now, I think I would make Oakland. I think I would obviously put Valpo first, but I think I go with Oakland, then Oakland and Wright State in some order. I think we kind of fit after those two, and then I think it's a Green Bay Detroit kind of pick 'em.
Yeah, and I think honestly, I look at kind of 2 through 6 in the standings right now, and it strikes me a little bit as the kind of the similarities from a few years back when 2 through 6 was kind of a pick 'em type of situation. This year, of course, I think you do have Oakland and Milwaukee are probably going to, and Oakland, Milwaukee, and Wright State. When push comes to shove, those are the 3 teams that are probably going to kind of duke it out for that second spot in the end. I think that Green Bay might have something to say about that, but that totally depends on a lot of different other things. Detroit, they're the way they've been operating is pretty erratic. So I don't think when you talk about the top half of the conference, they're slow. They're a little hard to kind of read whether you want to put them in the conversation at all.
I agree.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jim.
Did something happen in today's game with Paris Bass? Because I saw tweets about him almost getting teed up or something, and I missed it.
Yeah, I missed it too. It's Paris Bass, so I mean, his kind of trajectory, that whole thing going on with him this season, it's been on and off, and we had when we had Kara Jones on a few weeks ago, that was pretty much what he kind of his thought process.
He was definitely talking about how Paris Bass was definitely a me first type of player.
Yeah.
So
right, I remember that. But the announcers seem to think that I mean, they didn't mention anything about another team rules violation on the broadcast, but somebody tweeted about that too. Have you heard?
I know Ray McCallum likes to do this thing where he'll start somebody else over someone just because he's trying to send a message. He does that more than anybody else.
Okay.
So when you see Detroit having a lot of different guys starting for them, that has very little to do with they have injury problems or something, probably a lot more than the guy doesn't know how to, keep a hold on his players, keep his players, together. So he's, just trying to discipline them, and that's how he's doing it.
Yeah.
So that actually brings me up to the next point. And Jimmy, I know we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, particularly with Gary Waters, sort of with Steve McLean, but I think it's his first year at UIC. I think he's going to be fine.
Yeah.
But you're looking at it when you look at some of kind of the fan boards. There's a lot of fans that aren't happy with their coaches. Detroit definitely with Murray McCallum. Youngstown State with Jerry Slocum. Jerry Slocum is, I believe, in the last year of his contract. I do believe he has an option year, but I don't think anybody in Youngstown State would be sad to see Jerry Slocum go at this point. I mean, even Wright State. I know at the beginning of the year there was discussion about this being a make or break year with Billy Donlin. So
they still have that thread going. That thread on the message board's still going.
Oh, okay.
There's always every game. They're kind of going back and forth. Like, is this really, should we really be doing, like, is Billy Donlin really the guy? Is he not the guy? And it really depends on whether they win or lose. So I'm sure I haven't been on their board since they lost. I am almost 100% certain that somebody's like, well, this Oakland game, that means we need to fire him. They're so hot and cold depending on what's, how the team is doing.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
where Billy Donlin ends up in the minds of Wright State fans is probably whether or not he's in the title game, or a top 2 seed, and or really just in the title game. So.
Yeah, I mean, it lends the question. I mean, who actually does like their coach outside of Valpo? I mean, Valpo obviously, they got the Drew family pretty much has it on lock, and that is what it is. And
who does not completely escape criticism, though.
Oh, of course not. But I mean, not to the point, not probably to the extent of say a Gary Waters or a Ray McCallum or even a Billy Donlin. Jimmy, I know we talked. I know that there's probably some people out there who probably don't dig Rob Jeter either.
Oh my gosh.
See, I told you.
I think the list of people who are pro Rob Jeter at this point is smaller than the list of people who are anti Rob Jeter. I just think, this has everything to do with Bruce Pearl. He comes in, he lights the world on fire, takes the team to the Sweet 16, ups and leaves almost immediately. So you knew whoever was going to be the next guy wasn't going to have, he was going to kind of have a real difficult time getting people on board to begin with. And then, on top of that, you're talking about this is a guy who's he had never been a head coach before, so he was going to have time. He was going to have a period of time where he'd have to learn, and it really all worked against Rob. And now it's time. He is, along with Slocum, one of the deans of the HoriZone League. He's been here for 11 years. This is one of his best. This is one of his best teams, but that really doesn't matter to them so much. What matters to these people is that we get to the NCAA tournament, and
which he did 2 years ago, by the way.
2 years ago, but you will before somebody gives him credit for that, they will point to the fact that we are, we did that with a 7-9 team, and that 7-9 team was 5th in the conference, and they caught lightning in a bottle, and they'll want to go through the long list of why not instead of why. These are the same people that when you say, does it matter that Rob Jeter had in his tenure has had to contend with the best HoriZone League, and Bruce Pearl's best years happened when the HoriZone League was at its worst since we joined it? and they'll listen to you, and they'll just like shut it out, and they'll keep droning on about how, well, Rob Jeter's not the guy, blah blah blah. This is, we need to fire. I mean, there are still people who say we need to fire him when, I mean, he's almost undoubtedly in his last 13 months as the coach of the team, because he's under contract through June of 2017, and they haven't given him an update. Amanda Braun has not re-upped him in his contract. So I just tell all these people, you're in the twilight, you're likely in the twilight of the Rob Jeter era. You hope that he can do well enough that he can get another job somewhere else, and then you get Chad Boudreau as the assistant, who was a very good friend and a very good coach, and he's the guy behind every JUCO player we've ever recruited, which JUCO players are how we've built this program. Guys like Matt Tybee and back in the day James Ayers, or transfers. Chad Boudreau has done a lot of building for this program, so you hope that Jeter can move on in a way that we can, keep his momentum going, but you're never 100% sure. And these people, a lot of them just really don't like Rob Jeter, and it's because Rob Jeter's not what Bruce Pearl was. Bruce Pearl was a used car salesman. When you listen to them talk, it's not the style of play. It's not Bruce Pearl was a winner as much as it is that Bruce Pearl is just such a likable guy. When you're sitting in front of him and talking to him, and he's on your side, as in he's the coach of your basketball team, you love having him around. And these guys loved having Bruce Pearl around. A lot of them became fans because of Bruce Pearl. They had been apathetic before he got here, and they became fans after, when he was here. And because of ties to the university and the city, they've remained fans after he left, and they want another guy like that. And it's just, I think everybody's just, a lot of these people are just at this point where they're just kind of tired of getting close and not there. And when I say there, I don't mean the NCAA tournament, because we have gone to the NCAA tournament in 2014. We were there for the NIT, but what we didn't do was we haven't gone to the Sweet 16 since. And it's like, you do realize that we are a mid-major, right? You do realize that there are the number of teams in the past 15 years that have gone to the Sweet 16 from outside the power conferences and perhaps like the Atlantic 10 and the Missouri Valley. You realize that the amount of teams that have gone to the Sweet 16 out of all the rest of the conferences, you're talking about like enough to fit on one hand. So what do you expect of this program?
And more to the point, if you do decide, and this is going to be the quandary for anybody who happens to need to replace a coach. I mean, and it has been kind of the canon for mid-major coaches, particularly even HoriZone League being the example here of, if you get rid of this guy, is there any guarantee that the next guy is going to be any better?
Yeah, there are schools that have gotten rid of coaches because they've won somewhat but not a ton, and then they wonder, oh my gosh, this new guy is just so bad. I think Howard Moore was a good example. Not that Howard Moore succeeded. I don't think Howard Moore was like, I don't think Howard Moore blew the doors wide open. I don't think Howard Moore was this amazing coach yet. Mm-hmm. I just don't think I just think that UIC got rid of him too soon, and now they're seeing maybe we didn't do the right thing. Maybe we should have stuck with him for a while. Yeah. And they didn't. So now you're seeing, I mean, it's a transition year. So it's really not on Steve McLean.
No.
To really do this in year one.
And again, going back to going back to yesterday's win with McLean, you do see some kind of peaks at the future, because you have, you obviously have Dixon, you have Odiasi, you had Young, who was the second leading scorer yesterday. I mean, he's the guy who ended up eventually killing Cleveland State yesterday.
Yeah.
You have a really young team, and they pointed it out during the broadcast, which I might add was for the first time in a long time on the Horizon League Network and not on ESPN3.
I think we've had like 3 or 4 games this season. Not we as in Milwaukee, but we as in the Horizon League have had like 3 or 4 games this season on the Horizon League Network, and we've talked about it a couple times before, so we don't really need to open that can of corn again.
But again, to your point, McLean is probably, he's got since he's got such a young team, he's got the growing pains. We're going to chalk this year up to being kind of a learning experience, a long, painful one for him, as it turns out. Link Darner has, with Green Bay, I mean, given the crew that he has, obviously has been able to transition pretty well. Green Bay is still, still part of that upper half, the upper half of the Horizon League. So, I mean, those are two, Link Darner is probably an example of a guy who was able to kind of make the transition, it looks like, a little better.
I think Link Darner had a better returning roster than Steve McLean did.
Sure.
I mean, Jordan Faust, let's be totally fair to Steve McLean. He did not inherit one of the best 5 defenders of the past decade in the Horizon League.
No, he
Jordan
didn't.
Faust is one of the best 5 defenders of the last 10 years since Valpo joined the conference, for sure. We have not had and here's the other thing about him is that he's the most versatile defender I think I've ever seen. I don't think I've ever seen a player who is so adept at defending 1 through 5. He can defend. He could defend. He could go up against Oakland, defend Kay Felder and Percy Gibson. He could go into Valpo, defend Keith Carter and Vachel Fernandez, and he wouldn't be out of place in either one of them. I mean, obviously, Vachel's not the offensive wonderkind that some of the bigs are, but Jordan Faust can shut everybody down.
Sure,
he can shut all those kids down. He's such an excellent player.
And over the last 2 years, with all the stars and all the very excellent players that Green Bay has had, the Alec Browns, the Greg May, the obviously Kiefer Sykes, the one player that always I dreaded facing more than any of them was Jordan Faust. And just based on that, and just what you described on his versatility and his ability to defend.
I had mentioned on the Green Bay board that because there were some people kind of complaining about the loss, they're kind of feeling bad. They're kind of out there like, we lost to Milwaukee, we should have beat them, blah blah blah. And obviously, I disagree with that, but they wonder like, did we? What's going on, or when is it okay to become impatient, and things like that? And I'm like, look, Link Darner is following a very good coach. And by the way, in the last 2 years, you may have just gone to the NIT instead of the NCAA tournament, but you have those 2 teams. Each year, you lost one of the best players in your history. Alec Brown the first year, Kiefer Sykes the second year, and the other thing I had said on there was, look. I was going to say that they were 2 of the best 5 in conference history, or excuse me, in school history. I was going to say if they were the best 2 of the best 5, but then I started thinking about it, and I was like, maybe they're 2 of the best 6 or 7, because partly I'm not a historian for Green Bay basketball.
In terms of Green Bay basketball, probably the best player to come out of Green Bay, I thought, was Jeff Nordgaard. from
Yeah,
because he was a
obviously
part
Jeff
of the
Norgard and Tony Bennett are on there.
yeah.
I was saying, but I had hesitation and then said best 6 or 7 because, excuse me, I think that maybe Jordan Faust might be a better player. I think if I were building a team and I wanted to, and I had to pick from those 3 players, I think I would take Kiefer Sykes, but I think I would take Jordan Faust over Alec Brown. Because Alec Brown is a really good post defender, but I think Jordan Faust is just so far and away a better post defender than we've seen, or a better overall defender from all different angles than we've seen in the entire conference. That he might be one of their best players ever, and that's the kind of player that he has, that Link Darner has over there, that Steve McLean doesn't even come close to having on his roster at UIC.
No,
so
I mean, he's got guys. Yeah, he's got freshmen. So he's got, I mean, while Dikembe Dixon may grow to be that guy, he's still a freshman. So he's still going to make freshman mistakes. He's obviously, he's got a long way to get to where Jordan Faust is, because Jordan Faust has the experience behind him.
Right. I'm just saying there's a lot more on that team. There's a lot better team that Link Darner inherited. The one thing I'll also say to Green Bay is, look at how Link Darner has done with a team that, while he's had a good roster, that's really not a roster that's built for his system. That RP40, which I guess they're trying to push, is it's this relentless pressure for 40 minutes. That's what he's pitching, and his team's not built for that. Carrington Love probably could be like the number 2 or 3 guard in that system. Jordan Faust would definitely be a great fit for it, but the rest of that roster is not really built for the RP40. I mean, there's a couple guys. I think Charles Cooper might be, but really, all in all, he doesn't have the roster for his system. So Green Bay is, what are they, 4th or 5th in the conference right now? And they're doing this in transition.
5th.
I think Link Darner is a really good coach, and I think
he had a winning tradition. He really did have a very good, winning tradition.
They won the Division II national title
exactly
last year at Florida Southern, and he did this. He did something that Greg Campy, who was long considered one of the best coaches in Division II, Campy never even got to the Division II final. So what are we really talking about? We're talking about a guy who's really good, really, really good. And
I think and I know that in the beginning, when Wardle left, I know that when Wardle left, there was kind of the discussion on who should replace him, because I know that there was a discussion about potentially maybe one of his assistants taking over, something like that.
Brian Baroni was the assistant.
Right. Yeah, I remember that.
Brian Baroni was the assistant they wanted. He ended up going to become head coach at Butler Community College, and I think he resigned already because of drunk driving.
Ooh.
People have problems, and they are their own, and sometimes those problems are difficult to deal with. But yeah, Brian Baroni was who the players wanted.
Yeah.
That's what I remember.
I know that Faust and Love had preferred Brian Baroni, and they liked Link Darner when he got there. There's a story to tell that I can't really tell right now because it's not really my place to tell it. But regarding those 2 players specifically and their plans for for this year and beyond, and it was I think that they'll be happy by the end of the year with how their senior years went.
I think
these are two of the winningest players in program history. So
and I think And so when you look at that, and so when you look at that, obviously, when you think about Green Bay and Link Darner, and being able to inherit that team and then convince that team, because honestly, as we've seen with players in the past, a coaching change doesn't necessarily guarantee that the kid wants to stay there. And so for Link Darner to be able to convince everybody to stay and be able to, create an environment where they are still competing in the upper half of the HoriZone League, even though they've lost a Kiefer Sykes and a Greg Mays, it really says something about Link Darner, and he's actually, to me, kind of the exception. That whole situation is kind of the exception to the kind of the history of coaches being replaced, because for every Link Darner, you're going to have a couple of Mike Garlands in there.
Yeah, you never know what you're going to have when you come back and get a new coach. So if you're succeeding, you need to kind of find, a lot of these fans need to find a way to accept being the third or fourth best team in the conference on occasion. There's all 10 teams are playing to win. So you can't just automatically assume that because you have some built-in advantage that you think you have over everybody else, that you should always get there. And if the coach only gets you to the tournament once out of every 5 years, and you don't win a game in that 1 year when you get there, that it's time for you to move on and fire somebody. I just think there's runaway expectations for a lot of these schools in this conference.
Well, yeah.
Jim doesn't have any problems with that right now.
No.
Well,
Buffalo's doing fine.
Yeah, but as far as the coaches being fans calling for coaches to be fired, one of the instigators for that, I think, is and we've seen that at Valpo, the long string of near misses against power conference teams wears on you. Coming close, and you get, after a while, you get people denouncing moral victories. I still would like to know where that phrase came from to be attached to that meaning. But it does get tiresome to keep coming up just short against teams, and then if you're not coming up short against them, you're getting creamed.
Right.
And it's frustrating, and when people get frustrated, they lash out at any quick remedy they can think of, I guess, and one of them would be to get a new coach. I just think that's one of the drivers of that.
Sure, absolutely.
I think the problem at Valpo right now is, it's not do you fire a coach, it's how long can you keep Bryce.
Well, yeah, we got that problem, yeah.
I think it's a better problem to have, because it gives you an indication of where you're at.
Yeah.
I'll take that one step further, James. Not only the frustration of, I'm sure that some teams in the conference have about near misses with the high majors, but then you also have the frustration of getting close and not beating the top teams in your own conference.
Sure.
Perfect example last year was Cleveland State, where Cleveland State had the opportunity to take the regular season title and host the tournament. All they had to do was beat Detroit or beat Valpo, and they didn't do either of those things. And so they ended up as the 4th seed and ended up getting bounced out of the semifinals. And so there's some frustration there as well. I mean, because last year, now thinking hindsight being 2020, was it was Cleveland State's last best shot.
Right.
Considering what came afterwards.
Yeah. I think the scary thing is that there's multiple programs where I can pick a point in the last few years and kind of point to that as like their last shot at something, at having real success. Cleveland State was one of them. The other ones definitely Green Bay passed up with two of their best players.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, because Green Bay has the exact same problem as Cleveland State did. Because Green Bay, for 2 years running, had had on paper the best team, and then going back to last year, again they needed to win, and what happens then is they get swept by Cleveland State, and that kind of puts the kibosh. Then so they end up not getting the top seed, and they end up getting bounced out of the tournament, down the conference tournament. And then the year before, of course,
the problem I see is that this is the I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, that's fine.
The problem here is that this is kind of the negative side of many negative sides of being in a one-bid league.
Mm-hmm.
Is that as a conference, if you're not able to get to the NCAA tournament without winning that conference tournament, all of a sudden you're in a real bad way.
Mm-hmm.
Because you didn't win the conference tournament one out of every few years. All of a sudden the question is, well, will you ever get back? And the impatience is there. And
sure.
I mean, there are teams in power conferences, high major conferences, where they won't come close to winning conference titles, but they're in the NCAA tournament every year.
Sure.
So they kind of their fans aren't worried about it so much, so they're not complaining as much, and they're willing to keep a coach, because what does it matter that we're not winning the conference tournament, because we're going to the NCAA tournament, and maybe that team will win, go to the Sweet 16, and it's totally fine, because hey, we went to the Sweet 16. It doesn't matter if we didn't win the ACC or didn't win the Big Ten. We got to the the Sweet 16. We're one of the best 16 teams in the country.
Yeah.
So
there you go.
It's the problem of the one bid league. So the question for me at this point is, I'm a fan of Milwaukee, Bob's a fan of Cleveland, James is a fan of Valpo. The three of 10 schools. 10 schools that are very much interested, that we all have fan bases that have expectations of getting to the NCAA tournament, because that's the success. That's the meter of success at our level, is if you get to the NCAA tournament, you had a successful season.
Mm-hmm.
I think at some teams, I'll point to Valpo this year. Sometimes there's a little bit more you're looking for. Valpo's been to the tournament, a couple times the last few years. Now it comes to the point is, now it's time to put up or shut up and win a game. Mm-hmm. But for the most part, for the rest of us, it's about getting there. And you have to get there. And in a one bid league, we're not able to do it. So the question for me, I really think, is we shouldn't be talking about our coaches as much as we should be talking about what can we do to make this HoriZone League a multi-bid league. And I don't think it's impossible, but I think some tough decisions have to be made. And obviously, you guys know me well enough that you know part of what I'm gearing up for. But
here we go.
Yeah, it definitely has to be said. There's a point where you are hurting yourself by being associated with some teams. We had Bob and I had a nice discussion with a guy on Twitter last night. I think it was a Cleveland State fan?
Yes. Long time Cleveland State fan, yes. Who I just found
I
on Twitter last night, by the way.
I had never met him before, so I was happy to have the conversation.
I was familiar with the name. I remember him from many years back. So
he was listening to the podcasts previous,
and he's probably listening now too. So hello, Mike Deneen, and thank you for listening.
Yeah, of course. We really appreciate the subscriptions, the follows, all that. But what I wanted to bring up from that discussion was he had talked about how he was pointing out that the academics don't come into play. So why am I talking about Green Bay's academics? And that's really a thing between us. But
yeah, that's more of a kind of UW.
I don't have a problem with Green Bay specifically as for the Horizon League. I don't think Green Bay shouldn't be in the Horizon League. I'm totally fine with them being in the Horizon League.
And considering they outperform in the they've really outperformed their budget.
I think that Green Bay by far is the school that gets the most bang for its buck as far as basketball and athletics budget per victories and wins and postseason appearances and all that. So I think Green Bay achieves above and beyond. What my problem is that you want to avoid having these gong programs that don't ever do anything. And I think that the decision that I've brought it up a couple times, I think that we probably should have, instead of bringing in Northern Kentucky, we probably should have subtracted Youngstown. And it's something I'm kind of a broken record on it, so I won't get into it too much.
Funny enough, you mentioned that. I know that our
because they don't want to hear me knocking their school every other day. But we have 10 schools. 9 of them put men's basketball first across the board. 1 of them does not. And you whenever we talk about adding a school to the conference, because everybody likes talking about adding schools because you're bringing in somebody new. You're bringing in a new blood. It's going to drum up interest even among the diehards. Oh wow, I'm interested about this new program, and I'm very interested about having Northern Kentucky be part of the team. But we talk about the new blood, and we talk about when you talk about what teams you want. You're first and foremost. I think all of us are looking. We'd like to add a school that's got basketball success, but then we're looking about fit. What is the fit? And a lot of the times the private schools want to find another private school. A lot of times the public schools either want to find they want to find schools that kind of match their mission or match their profile. And the problem I keep seeing is that we have a school that doesn't fit us. And this is not a knock on Youngstown State, because if I had a football team that had the kind of history that Youngstown State did, I'd probably be a big football fan and want to put
they all are,
into football.
And especially since your president is in fact Jim Tressel.
Yes.
I mean, how can you not be a football? How can you not be if you're at Youngstown State right now, or you graduated from Youngstown State, how could you not be a football fan if your president is Jim freaking Tressel?
Well, he was the coach too a long time ago.
Right, he was exactly.
He was part of their So obviously, Jim Tressel, Youngstown should be doing everything they can to be how would I say this? They should be doing everything they can to be a great football power. But that doesn't mean that the rest of this conference has to get dragged down with them just because of that. And I know that UIC has been much worse than Youngstown the last 2 years.
Sure.
But since Youngstown's been a part of the conference, there has been, I think, exactly 1 year where they've been any kind of decent.
Well, the Kendrick Perry CIT season.
I think even in that year they were sub 500 overall. I think there was a year. I want to say it was 06, 07. They were something like. I want to say it was 06, 07. Youngstown State was something like 5th in the conference, and they were, I think they were like 9-7 in the Horizon League or something like that. And this was Youngstown State, but this was a year where we only had 9 teams. Their best year in my memory, they were still they were still in the back half of the conference. So, this is the program that we're all kind of looking towards. And this is a program that I think we should be looking towards and saying, does it serve us for them to continue to be a part of this conference? And I don't think it does. I think membership is something that has to be pushed for. That rant should be over. The other thing we need to start thinking about is, what do we do as a conference to, make it work with the membership? And I think that we really need to be starting to push for more challenges, because I know we had this problem this year, and I know that Valpo definitely had this problem this year. It is hard to schedule when you are a good mid-major. When you are a good mid-major and maybe not an elite mid-major, if you are perhaps a top 175 team, the school, people are going to be worried about playing you. So I know some of our scheduling, and I've talked to one of the coaches at one of the others, a couple of coaches at the other schools. I talked to a coach at Youngstown. I talked to a few coaches, and a common thread with them is, we just need more games. We need better games. So the Horizon League needs to be willing to spend some money. One coach had brought up that the Horizon League needs to start playing more bye games. That the Horizon League needs to start bringing in a bunch of we need to start bringing in teams to beat up on. And they point to the MAC, how the MAC will put in a lot of teams into the they'll put a lot of teams into the the postseason. Not always the NCAA or NIT.
The thing with the MAC is typically is the MAC has the same problem as the Horizon League. So for as many teams as the MAC has, yes, they're probably going to get they're going to get multiple postseason bids, but typically the MAC is by and large in the same boat as the Horizon League as it pertains to being a one-bid league. I really don't remember the last time that the MAC has had more than one team make it to the NCAA, and I don't think that's gonna change this year. So with regard, but as it relates to the MAC though, you also have opportunities because they have scheduling needs. The Horizon League has scheduling needs, and you see this in some of the teams within the Horizon League playing a lot of MAC teams. Like, for example, Cleveland State this year played 5 MAC teams. They pretty much played a good chunk of the MAC this year, and so and I think for mid majors, to me at least, I think for them to be able to get into to kind of elevate their game. I think, obviously the mid-major, heading to some of these games, with high majors is one thing, but I think also too, being able to mix in some more fellow mid-majors as opposed to, cream puffs from the Southwestern Athletic Conference or non-Division I teams, which drive me crazy every time I see it.
We had Trinity and Judson on our schedule this year, and that comes from not as much. It doesn't come from us being like this world-beating team, but it comes from us being this team that's not a world-beating team, but a good team.
Yeah.
Valpo's got the same problem. Their problem is probably a little easier than ours. I mean, they got Iona, which was a game we couldn't have gotten this year, and that's because Valpo looks to be like they'll probably be a top 50 team at the end of the season.
They will.
So there's when you're talking about mid-majors and you're a high major school looking to schedule them. This is what a high major assistant recently told me, is that you're looking at what's the risk. If we pay this school $75,000, they come in and beat us, what does it do for us? How bad is it for our program? So a school like Butler, when they were winning quite a bit and they were going into pretty much everywhere and they were, beating a lot of these teams, they were getting those games that the rest of us couldn't get because teams in the high major conferences were willing to take a loss they were willing to risk a loss because it didn't matter so much when the loss wouldn't matter so much when that team was probably going to be a top 50 or at worst top 100 team anyways. And then because it's a mid-major, they still think they have a really good shot to win anyways. So they'll put them on the schedule and say, hey, maybe that'll be a top 50 or top 100 win for us that we may not be able to get as many of in the conference season. So for a school like Butler was, or Xavier was, or Gonzaga was, being the elite mid-major, it's a lot easier to schedule because there's value in playing you, no matter what, whether they win or lose. And the problem for Milwaukee and a lot of the HoriZone League schools is if we take that bye game, if a team offers us a bye game, we go in and win, that just kills them, and it doesn't help us so much. Or excuse me, it doesn't help them if they beat us, because the chances of Milwaukee being a top 75 team are fairly low year to year. I mean, even this year, when I think we've got a pretty good team, I think we're probably going to end up in the 125 to 175. So it doesn't help Notre Dame to really have beaten us this year. Whereas Minnesota, we went in and beat them, is catastrophic. But then again, I think Minnesota was willing to play us because Minnesota wasn't expecting to win anyways, so they might as well get some teams that look and act and play a lot like Big Ten teams. So I think that's why we ended up on the schedule. But at the end of the day, I'm just saying it's hard for us to schedule, so we need to start working together and try and see what can we do as a conference of 10 teams. Can we put together a challenge with maybe the Summit League? Maybe it's time for us to just suck it up and say, look, if we want to look down on the Summit, maybe we should just start playing them every year. And then they can shut up when they say, "Oh, our RPI is better than yours this year." We can bring in North Dakota State.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that because Valpo would have had another good home or away game if we had a Summit League challenge.
Yeah.
If North Dakota State was going to Valpo, or Valpo was going to South Dakota State, that's good for the program. Good for them. Yeah. Good for the rest of us.
Great.
I had a question about you mentioned those two non-Division I teams that you guys played. We had two on our schedule this year, but it's my understanding that was part of the Beaver Showcase, almost like we were forced into it. Do you know how that works?
I don't know about how it worked with Valpo because I'm not familiar with the Beaver Showcase. Sometimes you'll have a promoter will put together a tournament, an in-season tournament, and there will be either some connection that they'll have, or they need to fill up and they don't have enough teams because, frankly, there are a lot of early season tournaments now. I mean, I would say 90% of Division I is in these tournaments now.
Sure.
So sometimes it's hard to get teams for those dates. So you just have to fill the hole with a non-D1. So I'm assuming that's probably what happened with you guys this year. That wasn't our problem. Our problem was Trinity was a game that happened anyways. What wasn't supposed to happen was the game that became the Judson game. That was a high major home game we had.
Okay.
And that high major team bought out the contract for that tournament or for that return or for that game, so we can't play them in that. We couldn't play them for the tournament. So, or excuse me, for the we can play them at home. They paid us to get out of the contract, so we had to scramble, and we picked up Judson.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, let's go ahead and wrap this up then.
Are we already at the point where we're dropping?
No, but we're at the point where we're probably pushing an hour and a half right now, at least.
Oh, really? What?
Yeah.
I can talk with James Squire for an hour and a half every day. So.
Yeah, I know. Well, yeah, of course you can. So, but yeah. So let's wrap this up. Love to thank our guest James Squire. Again, on the HoriZone blog, which is horizonleague.blogspot.com. And so we'll be back with you next week. Again, you can catch us on fourlights.fm and subscribe to our podcast. So we'll any parting words, Jimmy?
Prowl on, go Panthers. I'm really happy we got that win over Green Bay. Don't be too sour, Green Bay fans. Feel the power.
All right. So that's it. We'll see you next week then.
I can't wait